the meeting of the Amen squad. The ash-streaked sky over Gorlog was the color of old iron, storm bands rolling in lazy sheets that promised either rain or grit. You never knew which until it hit your teeth. The land wore its wounds openly, black volcanic seams, drowned flats glittering with salt, and ribs of broken stone where roads used to be. People here learned to live in the pauses between disasters. Anything more was a luxury. "Bad ceiling," Noodle rasped, looking up from beneath the brim of a sun-bleached sheriff's hat. He had the rattler's head and that long, sand-brown neck, but the body under the coat was all work. Broad shoulders, belt-worn scuffs, the stance of somebody who made ground his ally. His tail didn't so much rattle as warn. It lifted just an inch with the wind, then settled, the way a hand hovers near a holstered weapon. Beside him leaned Hypoth Frodas, masked and immaculate even here, fur-trimmed formal coat cut into a jester's silhouette, a slim, engraved cutlass kissed to the lip of its scabbard. Where Noodles smelled the weather, Hypoth watched the crowd, the Freehold's gate market. Freeholds were the stubborn outposts where exiles and traders tried to arrange a life together with walls, signatures, and sheer denial. "You hired me to reach the stage," Hypoth murmured through the painted mouth of his art's mask, "and yet you keep stopping me to admire the apocalypse." "Sheriffin' habit," Noodles said. "Ain't much law out here but what you carry. Eyes up keeps folks breathin'." Hypoth's gloved fingers drummed a jaunty rhythm on his scabbard. "MMM. And here I was hopping we'd only have to cut through boredom." They met 2 days back on a caravan road. The noble jester with a schedule and enemies, and the desert paladin who'd sworn vengeance on cruelty wherever he found it. Noodle had taken the coin because Hypoth was trouble with a timetable, trouble that telegraphed itself was easy to manage. Inside the freehold, a makeshift plaza simmered. Smiths hawked ore chisels, a tanner argued with a Goliath over rawhide, 3 orc mothers shushed a knot of children. By the well, a woman in a thorn-crowned circlet, green skin freckled darker along cheekbones, laughed softly with a tradesman while measuring herbs into a jar. Valbella Latkesh worked the edges of gatherings like a shadow that made you comfortable. She wore a corset that made a liar of her slight frame, short traveling shorts under a split skirt, belts for vials, and boots that said she trusted only her own feet. She watched a long time before committing, helper or hunter, depending on who you showed yourself to be. She noticed Noodle's straight-line scan of exits and smiled, predatory and kind all at once. "Desert lawman," she guessed. "You smell like sand and bad coffee." "Both true," Noodle said, tipping his hat. "You a healer, ma'am, or just dress like hope?" "Depends who's asking," Valbella said, then glanced past him, past the masks and merchants, to the smashed flank of a collapsed warehouse at the edge of the square. A faint metal thrum kept brushing the edges of her hearing, like a heartbeat trapped under stone. The maid sect cell that called this freehold home, folks here just called them the hidden hearth, had strung prayer flags and laundry across alley mouths. The flags were code, of course. Who was safe, who was watching, who had coin but not sense. They kept roots alive by dealing secrets like bread, brokering prisoner swaps, even arranging feasts when a truce needed soft lighting. Locals muttered that those maids knew too much, but better them as friends than as ghosts in your rafters. Hypotha's gaze ticked over the pennants and filed away the pattern. "Mediators," he whispered. "Which means we're in the calm before somebody's foolish idea of profit." The first scream cut through the market like a serrated blade. Not fear, warning. The outer scouts didn't run toward the gate. They ran at it, spears leveled, which was the only reason the first rush didn't fold the door in. Bloodfang marauders, orc-clad raiders who burned supply lines and took survivors in chains, came up the road with smoke at their backs. Behind them, slender figures with hooked poles waited to harvest the fallen. The cracked chain liked to be efficient. "Showtime," Hypoth said, stepping lightly to the side, drawing his mask into a painted smile as he lifted his cutlass. He flicked his wrist, and a lace of hoarfrost traced the blade, mere decoration until it found purpose. "Get folks behind the second wall," Noodle told a gate guard, voice dropping to a marshal's growl. The tail rose again, rattling once, not threat instruction. "You ring the hearth bell." Valbella was already moving, a swirl of satchel and skirt, taking the frightened by the shoulders and turning them into carriers. You hold him, you bind her arm. Yes, you can. If you look at me, you can do anything for 10 breaths. She said it with the same tone she used when she said, I see you. It turned shaking hands into work. The gate shuddered. A brute with a wolf bone helm hit it with his shoulder, then again, then again. The fourth strike only made it halfway before he choked on his own breath. A halberd head punched through the gap and yanked him forward. Auric Slick stepped into the breach like a wall that had decided to move. He was all shoulders and legs and stubbornness, orc paint stripping across the faint glimmer of scale along his jaw. His eyes were golden and wrong, serpent-slit, but they watched with the blunt, unyielding focus of an orc warrior. Back, Auric rumbled to the raiders. This tribe stand. You picked a fine time to worship walls, Hypoth sang, drifting to Auric's right, blade ready. Do try not to break before I've set my rhythm. Auric not break, Auric said flatly. Orc don't break. Orc, the wolf-helmed raider jeered, then ate cutlass. Hypoth's strike was elegant and mean, a dancer's step into an executioner's angle. He chose his first target like always, the cruelest laugh nearest a child. The gate gave, but it didn't matter anymore. Noodle's voice rolled through the chaos like a church bell. On me. He waded into the mouth of the breach with a long spear he'd unstrapped from his back, moving in flat, efficient lines. Where Hypoth sliced, Noodle shoved, shouldered, and smashed, fighting like a shepherd who had decided wolves were a solvable problem. The tail rattled when eyes lingered too long on a villager. That was the only warning men got before the spear but took their legs out. Behind them, Valbella built a battlefield out of certainty. You salt that wound. You hold the lantern high. No higher, good. When a slaver's hook snagged a fleeing boy, Valbella's voice went sultry and cold. Touch him again and I'll peel you down to whatever passes for a soul. The man hesitated just long enough for a stoneware bottle to break across his wrist. Potion burned like nettle fire and he dropped the hook, screaming. The collapsed warehouse finally decided to quit pretending it was a building. Stones tumbled, a slab rolled, and out of the chalked dust rose a shape in combat webbing, pauldrons scored, vest plate grooved with impacts, one arm a precise garden of surgical tools, the other a short-barreled launcher. A glare-etched flame sigil smeared the right forearm's plating, heat-scarred. Unit 8008's optics lensed open, all focus, no mercy. Query, triage priority, MDB said, voice too calm. His head turned, taking in Valbella's posture her command cadence. Designate field commander. Valbella blinked once. Fine, defend the line, care for the breathing first, then anyone you can pull back. She tipped her chin toward the raiders. And if they threaten the wounded, stop the threats. MDB's right arm coughed a concussive slug that folded a bloodfang at the waist. The left arm unfolded like a steel flower, sealing a gut wound with visc foam in 3 practiced motions. Auric and Noodle fought back-to-back without speaking about it because that was the only way to live another minute. Auric's halberd was two-mouthed, a slicing beak on one end, a hammer's face on the other. He broke knees with the back, split axes with the front. Every time a raider hissed, snake, something flickered behind his eyes. He did not let it take him, not here, not in front of a tribe. Move, Hypoth trilled, and Frost hissed across the ground in a tight ribbon. 3 men went down hard, cursing. Hypoth stepped on their throats with all the tender attention of a performer cueing applause. Jester, Noodle said, fending 2 spears. Take the right. Already there, Hypoth's smile never reached his eyes. The Bloodfang line broke first. Raiders didn't like losing momentum. The cracked chain tried to salvage value, hooking bodies indiscriminately until MDB turned and advanced on them like a verdict. He didn't run. He simply redefined distance. The glaive on his back stung out in a single, precise arc that took 2 poles at the shaft and sent their owners scattering. When a slaver raised a hand in surrender, MDB paused, internal logic grinding. He did not lower the blade. He simply rotated the weapon and disarmed the man, literally, then turned back to the dying with the same economy. When the ash squall finally did arrive, it came as a gray wall. The maid sect bell tolled twice, then cut. Inside now! Banners were whisked down and folded into aprons. Everybody who wasn't bleeding took somebody who was. They made it through the squall with firelight and foul water. The Freehold's council met in a cellar that smelled of damp rock and tallow. The hidden hearth's matron poured tea like blood hadn't been funneled into a drain 2 hours ago. "We have a problem," she said. "Bloodfang were just the anvil. Silent tusks pushing our smuggling routes, they want our mines. If they take the ore, we have nothing to trade. No steel, no bargaining. We asked Liphius for help, they sent promises. We asked Alifkong, they sent missionaries and 3 paladins who argued about doctrine until they starved." She smiled without joy. "We need something alive and mean that doesn't answer to any of them." Her eyes moved from Noodle to Auric to MDB to Hypoth, and finally to Valbella, whose fingers drummed on a corked vial. "I don't do payroll," Hypoth said lightly. "I do encores." "You do knives with timing," the matron replied. "I've seen worse currencies." Noodle pinched bridge scale where a nose would have been. "Roots need garden. Folks need savin. That's a ledger I can read." "Auric fight," Auric said. "Auric protect. Tribe pay meat and sleep. Auric no kneel to snake men." The last came out like a snarl pointed at no one and everyone and one person he carried inside. Valbella rolled the vial across her knuckles. "I go where the desperate are. That's where coin is and interesting company." Her eyes slid to Noodle with a frankness that made him cough. "I'll help your wounded and your negotiations. I'm very good at deciding who gets a second chance." MDB looked at Valbella, then the matron. "Directive: protect non-combatants, stabilize perimeter, neutralize credible threats. Confirming free contract parameters, accepted." "And I," Hypoth said, flipping his mask up so they could see the practiced grin that made crowds trust him, "I'm dying to try a new routine." His tone sweetened with a razor's edge. "You do have a few corrupt chieftains in need of creative criticism, yes." No one smiled. Everyone understood exactly what he meant. The first run out was not glorious. It was mud and bad maps, and a silent tusk ambush that tried to smash them in a ravine where the rain liked to pretend it was a river. Hypoth went down the bank like a ribbon cut loose, drawing fire with the sheer audacity of his footwork, while Noodle and Auric anchored the mouth of the cut. Halberd and spear weaving a lattice no one could step through without losing something they valued. When a tusk officer took a child's shield, Hypoth stopped smiling and simply walked into the man's space. There were no flourishes. There was only one hand guiding a cutlass along an angle that made speeches unnecessary. Valbella moved in the aftermath like a storm with soft hands, binding, doozing, whispering truths or lies as needed to keep panicked people breathing. She didn't bother hiding when she looked Noodle over. "You carry guilt like a vest," she said, sluicing ash from a wound and salving it. "Either let me take it off you for an hour or stop complaining about the weight." "Ma'am," Noodle said, ears tinting with a heat he'd blame on the weather, "you are a lot." "Only to the ones who are worth it," she said, and the raunch in it was teasing, not cruel, just enough heat to let him know she could wield that too if she chose. He did not run. He didn't lean in either. Sheriff Law, know the weather, don't promise the rain. MDB learned too fast for comfort. Every time he swapped in a recovered submodule, calibration routines, targeting governors, something human tightened behind his voice. In the dark by the embers, he would stop mid-sentence, optics dim, and see something that wasn't there. A lab, a hand, a betrayal, and then blink back and say, "Apologies, reboot complete." No one pushed. Noodle brought him coffee he could not drink. Auric set a spare blanket near his bedroll as if a machine might want warmth. Valbella, when no one watched, traced a ward on his chest plate that meant you belong. Auric slipped twice. The first time it was just a hiss and a too long look at a prisoner's throat. Noodle put a hand on his shoulder and said, "You're here." The second time the scales along Auric's jaw darkened and his pupils lanced to needles. He slammed the hammer face of his halberd into a rock until the breath came back to him in something that wasn't a rattle. "Snake inside," he said raw, not looking up. "Plenty of snakes out here." Noodle's drawl made the words gentle. "I ain't fixin' to lose a good orc to a bad rumor." "Auric orc," Auric said, like he needed to hear it in air. "Damn right," Noodle said. By the time they broke Silent Tusk's attempt to seize the freehold's ore caravan, saltpeter and salvage iron chained to 4 stubborn oxen, they'd learned each other's edges. Hypo distracted chieftains in open parley with jokes, so cutting they bled pride and made mistakes. Valbella kissed a slaver on both cheeks, so she could slide the sleeping draft under his tongue. MDB planted his boots and took a spear meant for a child, then shoved the man who threw it into a wall so hard the wall remembered. In the quiet after, sitting on crates while ash fell like ugly snow, Hypoth turned the mask in his hands and looked at the 4 faces around him. The paladin who sounded like campfire gravel, the orc who was not, the witch healer who could be gentleness or a storm, the machine learning how to want. You know, Hypoth said lightly, for a band of zealots and sinners we make a charming chorus. The Amen Squad, perhaps. You all keep muttering oaths to gods and causes, I'll keep time. Noodle snorted. I ain't said amen since. Valbella's smile curled. Call us what you like, just be there when I ask. Affirmative, MDB said. Auric fight, Auric added, which was as close as he got to poetry. They took the job, the next and the next, because the freehold kept breathing and the routes stayed open, and because in Gorlog, any day not spent drowning or burning was a victory. The maid sect cells sent them into feasts and duels and backroom prisoner swaps that would have gone to rot without a blade, a shield, a charm, a will, and something that didn't have a name yet but felt like a tribe. On a night when the storms rolled over in sheets and the world clicked its teeth but did not bite, they camped under a bent willow where the ground held just enough grass to call it mercy. Hypoth took first watch, dancing the point of his cutlass through the air to a tune only he could hear. Valbella wrote sigils in the damp and blew them into the dark like wishes. MDB logged a line none of them would read. Unit 8008, accepts responsibility. Auric sharpened the hammer edge of a weapon that wasn't supposed to have one. Noodle lay back, hat over eyes, tail quiet at last. Gorlog's a bad joke, Hypoth murmured to the night. Then we'll tell it better, Valbella said. No one argued. The ash kept falling. The second wall held. And somewhere, in the ugly rhythm of a continent of ruins that refused to stop breathing, 5 strangers started to sound like a chord. Part aye, the freehold holds. The first they saw was the dust. 2 columns, one friendly, one not, walking the horizon like twin verdicts. The freehold's ash-stained banners barely stirred. Every scarf and shutter was already tied for another bad day. Out in the scabland beyond the palisade, the wind combed black grit into ripples that looked like water if you were the hopeful kind. No one in the freehold could afford to be. Visitors, Hypoth murmured, perched on a broken wagon tongue near the gate. The jester's mask rested beside him, its painted smile dull in the flat light. His cutlass sat across his knees like a clever secret. 1 column with discipline, 1 with hunger. Discipline's ours, Noodle said, rolling his shoulder and checking the edge on a long, utilitarian spear. Hunger's always the other fella. MDB didn't look up from the wounded he was rebandaging in the lee of the wall. Correction, hunger may also be us by nightfall. Supply forecast, inadequate. Then we make sure there's a nightfall, Valbella said, slipping a cold-fire vial into the inner pocket of her split skirt. She wore her corset laced tight, belts snug with salves and charms. The little bottles chimed softly when she moved. And after, we eat. Auric stood just inside the gate, halberd grounded, staring down the road as if it might blink first. His orc paint cut green-tan skin into war lines, but the thin, glimmering scale patch along his jaw said what he didn't like hearing, serpent blood. He set his jaw as if the force of it could grind ancestry to dust. The friendly column crested the near rise at a steady, unhurried pace, 2 figures at its front. A small woman in traveler's garb with a lamp bouncing soft glyph light at her hip, and beside her a towering blue shape in Victorian bonnet and mail. Lobster tail raised like a banner, 2 great claws hinged at the waist, 1 pair of human hands resting with effortless readiness on the haft of a halberd. The freehold's gate captain, who'd seen ox trains and sandstorms and 1 very polite dragon asking for directions, actually forgot to breathe. By the maiden's hearth, she whispered. It's the maid sect pair, the Cowie's quiet star and her fortress. Nalani lifted the lamp and wrote in light, "Here to help." Then she tucked it in at her waist and waved, soft and polite, as if she were arriving for tea and not a siege. Everyone, including the Amen squad, looked up at Lobessa first. Of course they did. The blue jayum was a moving bastion, tailplate gleaming, claws at the hips like dockside cranes ready to hoist disaster out of the street. She planted the butt of her halberd, glanced down at Nalani like a bodyguard waiting for orders, and Nalani just smiled, tipped her head, and stepped forward to the gate captain. Glyphs fluttered from her lamp like bright moths. "We don't take command, we stand with you. A beat. Then tell us where the wall is thinnest." Noodle's rattler head tilted, amused despite the day. "Well, I'll be tiny general." Valbella's eyes warmed. "Not tiny, precise." Hypoth exhaled through his teeth. "Allies, then. Good, I was running out of fresh material." They didn't shake hands. Gorlog didn't do ceremony when breathing was work. They simply moved. MDB handed off the stabilize to the hidden hearth attendants. Noodle and Auric took the north breach where rain had rotted a beam and men had pretended not to notice. Hypoth ghosted along the parapet to plant little glass teeth in places only he could reach. Valbella anchored the inner yard, a pivot for panicked bodies into purpose. Nalani paced the inner catwalk and threw light from her lamp across weak joinery, mapping a lattice for carpenters who worked like they prayed. Lobessa went where the wood shuddered, locking her claws around fractured uprights with a slow flex until the groans changed pitch. Each time, she nodded for the next brace and the next. When she had a moment, she knelt so a wide-eyed child could touch the edge of a claw, then shooed them back with a smile you could see even under a bonnet. Hunger arrived before noon. They were Bloodfang this time, but a patchwork of hungry men and opportunists stitched together by a tusk lieutenant with a cruel chin. They came fast, loud, counting on shock to pry a gap. The freehold had learned not to flinch when ugly tried to be beautiful. "On me," Noodle said, and the north breach became math. He posted Auric as anchor, halberd for reach, hammerface to stop whatever had the nerve to step through, then used his spear like a carpenter uses a level. Not a flourish wasted, every shove setting the fight to plumb. MDB moved behind them in measured steps, plating taking blows that would have cut men in half, launcher-thumping concussive truth when a knot threatened to swarm. Hypoth turned the parapet into theater, the kind that got you home. He let the enemy watch him, let their eyes rise, then gave them exactly what they'd been waiting for: the lean, the grin, the flourish. When spears tracked him, they didn't track the rope looped at ankle height that sent 3 raiders careening into each other. When arrows chased his coat, they didn't find Valbella, who stepped out of shadow like a decisive rumor, threw a hex that turned a tusk lieutenant's confidence into a shiver that went straight to his hands, then wove back to bind a woman's slashed forearm with a strip that smoked and then cooled. "Breathe," Valbella told the woman. "Look at me. Good. Now you're mine for 10 breaths and then you can be yours again." Nalani's glyphs stuttered along the inner face of the wall. Brace here. Duck there. Push now. Her lamp writing the freehold into a better ending. Lobessa stepped into a crush at the corner and pivoted her hips. Both claws swung with terrible grace, not to maim but to shove, 2 men up and back in the same motion, bodies crashing into their friends and changing the slope of the fight. Auric held the gap and became a pillar, until something inside him moved. It started in the eyes, his pupils lanced to needles, breath shortened. "Snake inside," he growled, too quietly for anyone but the enemy to hear. They heard it and laughed, and that made something tilt further. The thin scales along his jaw seemed to darken, and his grip changed, more flex, less discipline, as if a different memory were moving his hands. "Auric," Noodle said without turning, "hear my voice." A raider stepped in to taste the moment, grinning. Auric's hammerface took the man's thigh, and the grin inverted into a scream. "Auric," Noodle said again, voice a drawl you could lean against. "You're here, with me." For a heartbeat, Auric didn't answer. The halberd edge sang and the hammer smacked, and he almost leaned into a rhythm that wasn't his. Then a hand, human, warm, touched the backplate above his ribs, not restraining, just there. "Stay," Valbella said, her voice honey-laid over iron. "Stay with what you chose." Auric's jaw worked. The breath came back. The pupils softened. He set his feet the way he'd been taught under sun and ash and the one-eyed stories, not in some slick stone temple he'd never known. "Oric Orc," he said, as if the words were a spell. "Oric, stay." "Good," Noodle said. "Now hit the next one like he stole your supper." They held. Not cleanly. Gorlog never did mercy in straight lines. MDB took a spear through his left pauldron and kept moving, the medical arm rethreading a man's life, while the glaive in his other hand clipped the knee of the one who'd thrown it. Hypoth got sloppy once, laughed too close, baited too far, and a club caught him along the ribs. He reappeared 3 breaths later with the club's owner neatly missing his weapon, and soon after, his appetite for anything but moaning. By late sun, the raiders broke. They didn't retreat with order, they bled out and scattered, leaving more behind than they could afford to lose. The freehold didn't cheer, it breathed. Sometimes that was louder. They didn't feast. They fixed things that would fail in the night. Nalani penned a quiet thank you in light on the inner gate post where only those who'd walked the wall would see it. Lobessa let 4 children climb her tail like a stair, and then, when no one was looking, leaned her forehead against a brace and closed her eyes just once. As the sky turned the color of bruised plums, Hypoth found himself alone with Valbella by the well. He unbuckled his mask and traced the chipped paint of its smile. "You cast today," he said. "I watched a man forget how to be cruel for a whole minute." "Sometimes mercy is alchemy," Valbella replied, tipping her chin. "Sometimes it's fear administered in the correct dose." "And sometimes it's appetite," he teased. She stepped closer, swift and deliberate, until the space between them held perfume and the faint chemical bite of salves. Her hand lifted, not touching, almost hovering just at the collarbone of his elegant coat. "You're not my type," she said, voice velvet and dangerous, "unless you decide to be." Hypoth laughed in spite of himself, too bright, then winced at the ache in his ribs. "Ah, the curse of options." Valbella's smile curved. "The curse of honesty." She let the promise hang, raunch turned to provocation, not performance, then drifted back to the wounded without looking over her shoulder. He watched her go, and for once his grin did not make a weapon of itself. The Amen squad gathered after moonrise in the shadow of the inner wall. The Freehold's council had given them hot broth, mended straps, a single, awkward, heartfelt bow. Nalani and Lobessa were saying their goodnights to the hidden hearth in quiet waves and glyphs. They'd be gone before dawn, as maid sect cells tended to do, arrive like an answer, leave like a rumor that turned out to be true. "So," Hypoth said, folding himself onto a crate with feline care. "The eternal question, who leads our merry choir?" Oric squared his shoulders as if a weight had been placed there. "Oric strong, Oric lead." MDB's optics clicked. Nomination acknowledged. Counterpoint. Leadership requires multi-domain decision speed and ethical triage. My latency is optimal. My emotional volatility is present. "Fancy way to say you'd follow a bad order if it sounded crisp," Noodle said, not unkindly. MDB paused. "Correct, I am improving." Valbella looked from face to face, gold eyes almost amused, almost tender. "Hypoth, you want it because you like the sound of yourself giving orders. Oric, you want it because it's what you think an orc should do. MDB would take it because the job is empty and he hates empty things." "And you," Hypoth said, "you sound like you're interviewing us." "I don't mind being followed," Valbella said, "but I prefer consent to obedience." "And me?" Noodle asked dry. "I get no read." Valbella's gaze settled on him. "You get the one that matters." Silence held for a long moment, broken only by the nightwood creak of the palisade and the distant hush of ash sliding off a roof. Hypoth sighed and tipped his head back to stare at the bent stars. "Oh, fine. Let it never be said I can't recognize a lead when the music insists." He lifted 2 fingers. "I vote for the sheriff." MDB's optics pulsed once. "Affirmative. Probability of mission survival increases with Noodle coordinating in battle vectors." He lifted a hand. "Vote, Noodle." Oric looked from Noodle to Valbella and then to his own hands. He set the halberd down with care and nodded, something like relief folding his shoulders. "Oric vote sheriff." Valbella watched Noodle. She didn't smirk, she didn't test him. She simply spoke a blessing and a dare at once. I'll be your conscience when you try to trade it for efficiency. Vote, Noodle. Noodle blew out a long breath that fluttered the brim of his hat. Y'all are gonna make me earn this, ain't you? Constantly, Hypoth said, grinning. Try not to be boring. Leader acknowledged, MDB said, tone flat and somehow gentle. Auric thumped the butt of his halberd once, a warrior's assent. Valbella stepped closer than formal, and reached to adjust the edge of Noodle's hat with 2 fingers, the gesture proprietary and fond. Don't forget to ask for help when the ledger goes bloody. He didn't lean in, he didn't pull back. He met her eyes and nodded, something old and bruised in him easing by a fraction. Reckon I'll take you up on that. They didn't call it a ceremony. They didn't shout a name. They simply stood together until the moment finished making them a thing, and then they broke apart to do what had always needed doing. Nalani found them before she left, Lobessa a silent blue shadow at her side, claws folded, halberd slung. The little lamp wrote soft notes in the air. We go. You did well. Keep each other. Noodle tapped the brim of his hat to her, then to Lobessa. Obliged. Lobessa dipped her bonnet in something like a curtsy that would have looked ridiculous from anyone smaller. From her, it felt like a blessing. She glanced at Valbella, just a glance, weighing, amused. Valbella gave the faintest incline of her head in return, a private conversation made of 2 gestures and 1,000 possibilities. Hypoth cleared his throat. I confess, he said to Nalani, I misjudged the maid sect. I assumed your currency was coin alone. Nalani's lamp sketched a simple shape, home. He bowed, not the stage bow, not the mockery, just enough to make respect an honest thing. Amen to that. Before dawn, the maid sect were gone, 2 silhouettes and a handful of fresh braces in the wall, and a lamp-glow memory on a gatepost that said thank you in a language anyone could read if they wanted to. By sunrise, the Amen squad were packed. MDB checked straps and seals. Valbella refilled kits from the freehold's modest stores, leaving twice as much behind as she took. Hypoth tied a scrap of freehold banner to his scabbard like a favor. Auric stood with his halberd resting easy, not because the snake had gone quiet, he knew better than to dream, but because the voice that called him back had names now. Noodle watched the road, the ash had settled. The day offered them that small grace. All right, he said at last, voice even, hat low, the new weight sitting like it had always been part of him. We got roots to ride and fools to disappoint. Let's move. They did, 5 shapes against the waist, not straight and not pretty, but holding a line only they could see, out of the freehold, into whatever Gorlog thought it could throw at them next. The wall behind them stood a little truer. The people breathed a little easier. And somewhere in the stubborn heart of a ruined land, the word Amen started to mean something like we don't quit. Selecting story. The freehold was a smudge in the distance by the time the Amen squad slowed their march. Wind whipped the ash flats, tugging cloaks and stirring grit into their teeth. They paused in the lee of a broken stone arch, the last ruin of a place too forgotten to deserve a name. Noodle leaned on his spear, rattler tail giving a dry twitch. Reckon we need a heading, he said, voice calm, hat brim low. Ain't much sense wanderin' till we starve. Auric grunted, tapping the hammer end of his halberd against the stone. Auric say fight here. Gorlog still has foes. Take ground, make strong. Valbella leaned back against the arch, arms folded beneath her corset, thorn crown catching the dim light. Stay too long, we rot with the place. I say coin. Cities pay for healers and charms. Travel buys freedom. Her golden eyes flicked to Noodle, almost teasing. Unless you like the smell of ash. Hypoth made a lazy bow, mask dangling from his belt. Ports, he said. Black Plague haven or not, ports mean wine, rumor, and stages. I perform, I eat. Simple. His grin sharpened. Besides, it'd be fun to humiliate a pirate in front of his crew. MDB straightened suddenly. Optics pulsed with faint static. Correction, signal detected. Faint, buried in residual division code. Direction, east by southeast. compulsion analysis, high probability of personal relevance. The others turned. "You're hearin' Ghost's machine," Oryx said flatly. MDB's chassis gave a low hum. "Possibility acknowledged. Still it calls." For a moment the squad was quiet, only the wind fussing at their boots. Noodle lifted his head, gaze sweeping each of them. "So that's the spread. Stay, chase coin, brave pirates, or—" He tipped his hat toward MDB, "follow the bot's itch." Valbella smirked. "You always make it sound so romantic." "Not romantic," Noodle said. "Just choice, and choice means we talk." They did, voices trading low and sharp, raunch and argument, logic and growl. MDB stood silent once his piece was spoken, optics pulsing faint as though listening to something no one else could hear. At last Noodle pushed off the stone, rolling his shoulder. "All right, heard you all." He set his spear to his side and walked out from under the arch, tail giving one soft rattle that carried in the hush. The Amen squad fell in behind him, each expression saying more than words, each footstep sealing the decision. The road stretched, gray and endless, and by the time they crested the ridge, the direction was clear. Their path bent toward the east, pulled by a faint signal that only one among them could hear, and all had chosen to trust. MDB's arc. They walked east until the horizon stopped pretending to change. The ash flats became gravel, then broken teeth of rebar and stone poking up through gray dirt like a jaw too stubborn to stay buried. MDB led without being asked. You could tell by the way his optics pulsed, slow and sure, like a heartbeat for a thing that wasn't supposed to have one. On the second day, the wind stalled and the heat just sat there. Noodle called halt under the lee of a half-collapsed billboard that once sold a world no one remembered. MDB kneed into the shade and ran a diagnostic in silence, fans humming. Hypoth blew dust off his mask and flicked it idly by its strap. How many more poetic ruinscapes are we meant to admire before your invisible siren sings, metal saint? MDB's head turned, optics steady. Estimate 3 to 5 days at current pace, signal gain increasing, quality garbled. Content, frame drop echoes, visual fragments, voice bleed. Voice of who? Oryx asked, suspicious like the question could bite. Unknown, MDB said. He hesitated, a millisecond longer than machines are allowed. But it knows me. Valbella crouched, skirt whispering against grit, and set a canteen by his chassis. And you feel obliged to know it back. MDB glanced at the canteen, then at her, as if committing the gesture to storage. Affirmative. Noodle tipped his hat lower and used the spear tip to draw a line in the dust, their path in a child's map. We ain't saints, he said, but I ain't gonna leave a partner chasing ghosts by his lonesome either. We stick. Hypotha's smile sharpened. Listen to the lawman sermonize. Fine, but if your oracle ends up being a rusted vending machine declaring its undying love, I'm charging rent for my patience. On the third day they hunted. Oryx brought down a dust boar with a hammer-faced thunk that felt like closing a door. Valbella smoked the meat with a pinch of something green that hissed, and then sweetened. MDB repaired a cracked axle for a farmer they found stuck in the flats. The man paid in dried fruit, and the kind of look you give a miracle that wears dents. Hypoth taught 3 children the cup-and-stone trick, then stole his own stone back to their squeals. Noodle fixed a strap on his pack and muttered a low prayer so plain it sounded like common sense. At night, MDB talked. Not to be charming, machines don't court, he just explained. Frames, he said, optics dimmed to embers. Blurry sparks, a lab with low ceilings, someone humming off-key, a line of units, a hand on my chassis, the word stay. Then white collapse. Creator, Valbella asked softly. Probability high, a pause. In some frames I am taller, in others smaller. My designation changes between clips. 8008 is most frequent. Hypoth lay back and looked at the bent stars. Everyone's haunted by something. Your ghosts just have serial numbers. MDB, Oryx said, voice low. You pay us for this wandering. MDB considered. I cannot promise coin, he said, and the honesty was so clean it almost hurt. I can promise this. When the signal is resolved, your priorities take precedence. I will protect the squad's next mission with extreme prejudice. Valbella smiled with her eyes. That's a kind of coin. Fourth morning, a fight. Not the story kind. No banners, no speech, just a sand scatter. 6 lean men with hooks and hope. It ended quick. Oryx's halberd kept the world at the distance he decided. Noodle's spear put people on the ground without sending them to the cold. Hypoth cut one man's bootlaces mid-swing. The poor fool tripped over his own future and retired from banditry on the spot. MDB's launcher thumped a warning burst that lifted another into a soft, regretful arc. Valbella hexed the mean out of a third long enough to make him remember a birthday cake. He crawled away crying from kindness, which is a respectable way to leave a fight. That night, patience burned thin. Hypoth popped his jaw and paced. For days eating wind and broken glass, he said. Forgive me if my muse prefers taverns that don't bite. Oryx grunted in agreement. Oryx like hitting things, not walking to not hit them. Valbella's tone cooled. Enough, he asked for trust, you gave it. Don't treat your own word like bargainware. Noodles spoke last. We picked the road, he said. We'll pick the next one too. Till then, drink water. They found the town by smell. Iron and onions, wood smoke and boiled cloth. The ruins loomed behind it like a thought no one wanted to finish. A handful of low buildings huddled in the lee of a cracked retaining wall, patched with love and whatever wasn't nailed down elsewhere. Dogs slept with one eye open. The only sign with letters left said simply, stay. They stayed. A woman with rope-burn wrists ran the baker and gave them last bread first. Where she took the coins when they had none was into a smile that said don't worry about it yet. The inn was 4 rooms and a hallway with opinions. The well bucket squeaked like a folk song. For the first time in days, boots came off, gear got put in corners, and Valbella's shoulders dropped half an inch. Banter found them in the way it does, uninvited, then essential. Tell me you're more interesting than the road, Hypoth said to the inn's lone table, which was how he addressed crowds smaller than 10. I can juggle 3 knives, said a boy from a doorway, lying the way children lie to get dared. Marvelous, Hypoth said. Now juggle 1 knife and 2 reasons not to. Noodle swapped his hat brim for a rag and wiped dust from spear fittings. Oryx leaned his halberd in a corner with reverence, then glowered at it as if daring it to betray him. MDB stood by the window, utterly still, listening to a frequency no one else could hear. An elder came at dusk, spine like a bow, eyes like dry wells. You're going down there, she said. It wasn't a question. MDB inclined his head. Affirmative. Then you'll take this. She unrolled old cloth and offered a weapon born from 2 centuries of scavengers' wisdom. Compact, ugly, honest, well-maintained receiver, fresh spring, cut-down stock, a smooth bolt you could cycle blind. There was only 1 magazine. It looked like it had opinions about being wasted. Noodle started to speak, but the elder's hand had already turned toward one of them. A decision made with the quiet authority of someone who has had to choose too many times. The grip was tested. The weight accepted. No one announced it. No one needed to. Listen, the elder said. The tunnels aren't empty. They chew. They hum. We take scrap and we don't go deep. Bring back what you must, but if the walls start to sing, come up. We'll be careful, Valbella promised. The elder's mouth did a thing that wasn't a smile and wasn't not. Care gets you halfway. Luck rents the room. Debt keeps you coming back. Late-night quiet found the Amen squad in a triangle of lantern light and fatigue. MDB outlined the plan with the flat competence of an old field manual. Stair access points 3. We take the east service stair, least collapse risk. Expect conduits, debris chokes, possible dormant machinery. Hostiles, low probability of organized humanoid presence, high probability of remnant defense assets, assault drones, model AD-9 or AD-12. Smaller than me, faster with modular mounts. Guardian class probability, non-zero. Non-zero, Hypoth echoed. So yes. Maybe, MDB said. If so, avoid direct angle of attack. Flank, disrupt sensors, don't be a hero. Noodle's eyes flicked, amused. Says the fellow walking point. Correct, MDB said simply. Dawn bleached the ruins to bone. The mouth of the east stair yawned like a secret that had learned patience. The townsfolk watched them go without waving. Inside, the world changed temperature. Air went cool and tasted of coin, old metal, oil, and the sourness of things that haven't seen sun in too long. Their lamps threw good light. Nalani's lamp would have loved these walls, but she wasn't here, and the thought made Noodle tuck his chin and walk easier, as if that could stand in for her. They found signs of those who'd come for salvage and lived. Chalk arrows, nylon staging lines, a stacked cairn of busted casings that said turn back in any tongue. They found signs of those who hadn't, a glove still folded around nothing, a child's bead, a boot print half in, half out of a stain that was too old to honor. MDB's voice barely rose above the hum of his chassis. Stay close, mark corners, if I say run, run. The signal grew, more texture than sound, like someone speaking behind a door with their mouth to the wood. MDB's steps changed. He started choosing paths before their lamps showed them. When they paused, he didn't ask permission to keep going. He simply inclined his head and moved. The first assault drone woke in a whisper, servos untensing, optics glancing awake. MDB's launcher thumped first, the drone's shoulder mount stuttered a burst into concrete. Then there was no more whisper. There was only physics and intent. AD-12s had no poetry. Two chain-walked the wall, fast and mean. One went for Hypoth, who slid under it and flicked something bright into a seam that sparked like regret. Oryx's hammerface turned a second's charge into teeth and scraps. Noodle's spear found a joint and levered a limb against itself. The drone jittered and went still. Valbella hexed the fourth with a roil of bad luck that made it put its own foot wrong. Oryx cleaned the mistake with professional enthusiasm. 4, Hypoth said, breathing hard, grinning harder. You promised 5, Saint. Affirmative, MDB said. 5th is near the source. Then he left. Not a sprint, just a decisive, inevitable forward that didn't wait to see if anyone followed. Hey, Oryx barked. Metal man. MDB, Noodle's call didn't catch. What do you do with a partner who's a promise in a chassis? You follow, or you finish what he trusted you to finish. They did the latter first. The fight ended fast and ugly. Valbella used both hands, both schools, curse and cure, blight and balm. Noodle bled a line on his shoulder and didn't bother to announce it. Hypoth ducked a bad angle, rolled, and came up with a borrowed smile he'd return later. Oryx held, strong like a doorframe, grunting like a vow. They ran the corridor MDB had taken. It sloped, then widened, then glittered with failure and memory. Wrecks everywhere. Not just the 4 they'd left, but a dozen more, old as dust, peeled back to frames by time and men with clever tools. One wall bloomed with tiny hand scratches, the kind you make when your other choices are waiting or praying. The hum grew teeth. They reached the intersection and saw light ahead. A steady, poolsing brightness, not natural, not their lamps. They rounded the corner and the world said, you're late. MDB was still fighting, if that's the word. One leg was gone at the knee. The left, torn ragged where armor built to shrug off small arms, had finally met something that meant it. So he had propped himself on his glaive shaft and used the leverage like crutches, like pikework, like stubbornness carved into engineering. His medical arm, left, hung in a ruin of cable and sparking joints. Sensors flickered. Chassis plating smoked in scored crescents. Facing him, half submerged in a plinth of ruined interface rails, was a guardian. It had the slow, infuriating patience of a machine that believes it cannot be surprised. Taller than a man, broader than a door, optics banked to a thoughtful red, it moved like a thought finishing itself. The air stank of ozone and hot metal. Squad evac, MDB said. Static crawled through his voice. Priority retreat. Target pattern unknown. I cannot. The sentence snapped in half and fell to the floor with a hiss. The Guardian rotated. Its chest assembly peeled open like a blossom with incorrect opinions. Something inside powered up with a sound that was light before it was noise. Noodle moved first. He didn't think hero. He thought angles and timing, spear low, eyes climbing the machine's body to count seams. Oryx roared, the wordless sound people make when they intend to be the difference between alive and not. Hypo threw something bright and deceitful that made the Guardian glance the wrong way for a single perfect beat. Valbella's hands lifted, and she whispered a curse that turned certainty to doubt. It wasn't enough. The Guardian learned. It always learned. The chest pulse built to a sun you could carry. MDB braced. And in that white half-second when everyone's choices become one, a figure stepped into the line, raised the compact weapon the Elder had wrapped in cloth, and fired. The shot cracked the room in half. Light washed everything in a violent, holy bloom. Cut to black. Sparks hissed from MDB's frame, the smell of ozone thick in the ruins. His great chassis sagged under the weight of damage, one arm dragging, plating burned black. The rest of the Amen squad stood in a loose half-circle, catching their breath. The battle against the Guardian drone had tested them in ways no tribal skirmish ever had. Smoke still curled from the shattered wreckage when every eye fell on Valbella, the one who had fired the final shot. The gun's barrel still glowed faintly in her hands, and her fingers trembled. The others whispered words of awe, murmurs of relief, but Valbella heard only ringing in her ears. MDB's survival was all that mattered. The gun clattered to the ground as she stumbled forward, kneeling by the bot's side. "Bold," Hypoth muttered, watching her drop her usual teasing to cradle the machine like a dying man. "Never thought the Thorned Witch had that in her." MDB's voice rasped, processed, and broken. "Not over." Their heads snapped back toward the Guardian. The machine, head crushed yet still twitching, dragged itself forward. One broken claw lifted high, casting a shadow over them. "Dumb machine," Auric muttered, stepping out before the others could move. His serpent eyes narrowed, his bulky form towering. The claw descended, Auric snarled, and with one brutal swing of his halberd, smashed the Guardian's skull to molten slag. A heavy silence followed. Then Hypoth laughed, sharp, mocking, almost musical. "Well, I suppose even rocks for brains can shine once in a while." Auric smashed snake metal. Auric grunted proudly, ignoring the jab. Noodle, ever the stoic, laid a hand on MDB's sparking chest. "Easy, partner, you ain't done yet." But MDB wasn't listening. With grim focus, he dragged his broken form toward the transmitter at the chamber's heart. The others, thinking he would commune with it or unlock secrets, held their breath. Instead, MDB raised his remaining arm and crushed it to fragments. "No more beeping," he declared simply. Sparks spat from his torso, but his voice somehow carried peace. The squad stared, dumbfounded. "That's it?" Hypoth asked. "You march us through hell, bleed wires, and it was just to stop the sound." "Yes," MDB replied flatly. Then, like an animal, he set upon the Guardian's corpse, tearing pieces free and integrating them into his own frame. Valbella licked her lips. Efficient and a little savage, I like that in a man of iron. Hours later, they gathered around as MDB turned, holding a small chip between metal fingers. His optics flickered, dimmer than before. "Insert," he said, pointing to the panel on his back. He looked not at all of them, but at Noodle. The sheriff froze. "Me." "Yes, trusted," MDB confirmed. With trembling hesitation, Noodle slid the chip into place. MDB convulsed, optics darkening. For a terrifying moment, the squad thought they had killed him. Then a pulse surged through his body. His blade arm flared with new light, plasma searing the air. "Feeling," MDB whispered. Then his voice distorted, fragments of a memory leaking. "Unit C Hydra Creator Betrayal," before silence consumed him again. The squad laid him among salvaged parts. Hours later, rattling hums and steady sparks, MDB rebooted, reborn sturdier, his glaive glowing with an energy never seen before. It was Valbella who broke the silence. She leaned against a pillar, arms folded under her corset, the thorn crown glinting faintly in the ruined light. "Well," she purred, "since we all thought you dead for a heartbeat, I think a little celebration is in order, don't you?" "Valbella, this ain't the time," Noodles started, but she had already prowled closer, brushing a hand across his chest. Her tone dripped with mockery and allure. "Heroes should be rewarded, or at least reminded they're alive." Noodle went red under his hat and froze like a statue. Auric tilted his head, confused. Why Valbella rub on friend? The tension broke into laughter, uneasy for some, genuine for others. At last, MDB stirred, staggering upright. Spoils, he said. The others blinked as he led them deeper into the ruins, into a sealed storage vault. Inside, piles of rot and rust greeted them, but not all was lost. From the wreckage, MDB unearthed MREs enough to last for months, packed into his chest storage with mechanical precision. A cache of 83,271 Felks, glittering like treasure in the dim light. A battered but functional weapons crate, from which MDB pulled the damaged gun Valbella had discarded earlier. He began repairing it silently, reforging it with scavenged Guardian parts. Hypoth whistled low. Well, that solves coin for travel, doesn't it? Auric's eyes lit up, though he didn't quite understand the value. Auric buy big food now. Big food later, Valbella teased, still lounging. For now, I'll settle for a drink and company. The others rolled their eyes, but the mood lightened. For all their trials, the Amen squad had earned a reprieve. When camp was made that night, Valbella sidled closer to Noodle again, lips brushing his ear. You're stiff, Sheriff. Maybe I can loosen you up. Noodle stammered and fumbled with his canteen, drawing laughter from Hypoth and a groan from MDB. But beneath the teasing, the five of them, warrior, sheriff, machine, jester, and cursed healer, felt the first threads of true bond take root. Next phase. The Amen squad returned to the town like battered heroes. Dust clung to their cloaks and armor, blood not all their own. The townsfolk gathered in a hush as MDB, patched together and still sparking faintly, trudged through the gates with his glaive sparking plasma fire at its edge. Behind him came Auric, dragging the ruined head of the Guardian drone like a trophy. Valbella, lips curled in a half-smile as though she knew the crowd would whisper her name. Hypoth, jingling faintly with every step like nothing had touched him. And Noodle, hat brim low, tail rattling just enough to warn anyone who came too close. The villagers showered them with bread, fruit, flowers, whatever meager thanks they could offer. The spoils from the wreckage, though, were far greater. Chests of Felks, MREs stacked to bursting, and weapons none had seen before. For once, the Amen squad rested in comfort. A warm meal, clean cots, silence that wasn't filled with clashing steel. But the peace didn't last. The next morning, they loaded into a carriage bound for the crossroads. From there, the path forked 4 ways, each road pulling them toward a different fate. The air was tight with fatigue and unspoken doubts. MDB sat stiff and silent, still humming from his repairs. Auric's bulk filled half the bench, arms crossed. Valbella lounged like a queen in exile, legs crossed, eyes watching. Hypoth twirled his saber in lazy arcs, and Noodle, brim shading his eyes, kept one hand on his rattling tail. Finally, Hypoth broke the silence. So, 4 roads, 5 souls, 1 carriage. His grin was all teeth. Where shall this circus parade next? Auric grunted. Gorlog done, tribe too weak to fight us now. Orc blood say move. Auric say darken, fight monsters, kill them, take glory. Valbella laughed, low and mocking. Glory? Auric, you'd last all of 10 steps before some horror chewed you up. Darken is a death sentence, not a plan, I say Liphius. Green lands, fat nobles, endless markets, and plenty of shadows to vanish into when I need to. Her eyes drifted to Noodle. Hunt. Of course you'd want a place full of intrigue, Hypoth chimed in, his tone honey-sweet but sharp beneath. Liphius would suit you, but that's my homeland, and believe me, nothing good waits there. If we're to carve our mark, we should head to Meridius, the center of the world, the stage where kings and merchants alike play their games. That's where we'll find opportunity worthy of us. Or trouble, Noodle drawled, tipping his hat back to look at him. Valbella smirked. That's the point. MDB's optics flickered, voice flat and mechanical. Analysis, Alifkong, desert harsh, resources scarce. Conflict inevitable. Sheriff Unit's knowledge of terrain would increase success ratio, recommending Alifkong. All eyes turned to Noodle. His jaw tightened. He hadn't expected MDB to back him, not like that. You'll macken this harder than it needs to be, he muttered, tail rattling low. Alefkong's where I was made, where my kin slither and bite. Desert folk, old hatreds, raiders on every dune. Ain't no peace there, but there's truth. And truth, what we need. Hypoth snorted. Truth or nostalgia? Better than prancin', back to your fancy halls in Liphius. Noodle shot back. Oryx slammed a fist into the carriage wall, rattling the whole frame. Too much talk, Oryx say darken. Darken's a tomb, Valbella hissed. Cowards. The carriage filled with voices, overlapping, sharp. Valbella mocking Oryx's simple words, Oryx barking back. Hypoth sneering at them both, Valbella cutting him down with venom of her own. Even MDB's steady voice was drowned out, repeating his Alefkong recommendation like a broken record. Through it all, Noodle stayed quiet, stoic, watching. Finally, he slammed the butt of his spear into the floor. The sound silenced them all. We ain't votin', he said flatly. Ain't playin' dice with our lives. I asked y'all to speak so I could listen, but in the end, it's me settin' the course. The carriage rattled on. Dust kicked up outside, sunlight streaming through the slats. Noodle lifted his head, voice firm. We ride for Alefkong. Oryx scowled but said nothing, tuskless jaw clenched. Hypoth rolled his eyes but leaned back with a smirk. Valbella's lips curled, unreadable, but she watched Noodle with new interest. MDB simply nodded, optics dimming in what almost looked like approval. The desert waited. Pirates' haven. The spoils of the ruins were not coin in sacks nor gems in chests. They were numbers. MDB discovered that quickly enough. The Felks glittered not in the eye, but in the signal, compressed into crystalline storage drives tucked deep in rusted lockers. When the party returned to the village, he sat beneath the shade of a broken tower, pulling the shards apart with careful claws. Each of the 5 received a band of steel fitted snug to their wrist. Currency system unified, MDB intoned, though his voice crackled with static. Felks, digitized, I serve as central node. Should you require funds access through me, I am your bank. They traded glances. Oryx squinted at the band like it might bite him. Valbella slipped hers on with a languid smirk, testing the glow of its tiny screen. Noodle adjusted his hat, tail rattling softly. Hypoth, of course, immediately spun his wrist to see the device catch the light, already treating it like jewelry. With that, they were no longer paupers. They were rich, or as rich as the wastes allowed, and riches bought roads. So they set out for Black Plague. The journey spanned days. Carriage wheels broke twice, and more than once they had to push the damn thing through muck. At night, they camped, Oryx snoring like thunder, Hypoth twirling his saber even by firelight, Valbella vanishing into the shadows only to return with game or herbs, and MDB sitting motionless, sensors glowing like twin stars. Noodle spoke the least, but watched the most. A sheriff at heart, he made sure the circle of firelight stayed safe. When at last the sea stretched before them, it was not calm blue but iron gray, foaming against the cliffs. Black Plague rose out of the haze, a sprawl of ships lashed together, hulls turned into streets, sails stitched into roofs. The smell of brine, tar, and spice struck them as hard as any fist. Eyes followed them the moment they stepped onto the dock. Whispers trailed. The hulking brute with serpent eyes, the green-skinned woman with a cursed crown, the noble dressed in furs and laughter, the rattle-tailed paladin with a sheriff's gait, and the machine sparking faintly with every step. Pirates were used to strangers, but these strangers, they were a story waiting to happen. Valbella felt it most. Men leaned from rigging and doorways, lips curling, whistles sharp. Words like sweet thing and hag's gift followed her as she walked. Normally, she might have smirked, toyed, even indulged. But the hunger in their eyes was not the kind she chose. It was the kind that wanted to take. Her hand drifted toward the pistol at her thigh. But before she could unholster, Hypoth slid between her and the jeers. He bowed with a flourish so polished it almost mocked them. "Gentlemen," he said, voice velvet, eyes like ice. "Whistle again, and I'll show you how easily a tongue can be removed." The crowd chuckled, but none stepped forward. Pirates or not, they respected performance, and Hypoth performed menace as art. Noodle gave him a single nod. No need for the sheriff to lay down the law when the jester had done it. Valbella's lips parted in surprise, then curved slow and sly. She slipped the pistol back, eyes lingering on Hypoth longer than before. Auric, oblivious, sat at a long table nearby, devouring a roasted hog shank whole, grease slicking his chin. MDB stood behind him, like a silent sentinel, occasionally turning his head at odd angles as though he could not quite comprehend the chaos of the port city. But his presence was enough to keep the bolder pirates at bay. And so the first day passed. But Black Plague was not all menace. By morning, its truer face revealed itself. Laughter over tankards, merchants hawking wares from every corner of the world, children darting between barrels, musicians strumming wild tunes that turned the streets into a festival. Pirates they were, but it was a kingdom built on hospitality as much as plunder. To trade here was to be welcomed. Still, Valbella's eyes lingered on the men who stared too long. She did not trust smiles so easily. 2 days they waited. 2 days they learned the city's rhythm, bartered supplies, and rested without fear of raids. Auric nearly started 3 fights and finished 1. Hypoth collected an audience at the tavern, turning insults into applause with cutting wit. MDB even fixed a leaking water pump for the locals, children trailing behind him like ducklings. On the dawn of the 3rd day, the ship came. Its sails were black, its prow carved like a serpent's maw. Their tickets bought, their packs heavy, they boarded. The gangplank creaked beneath them, and as the sea spray rose to kiss their faces, they left Black Plague behind. The Black Plague ship was no war vessel, more a floating bazaar than a fortress, with sails patched by 10 hands and cabins that smelled faintly of spiced rum. For the first days, the voyage was pleasant. The sea opened wide and blue, endless, dotted with the shadows of gulls. Passengers drank, played dice, and sang. Auric brawled arm-wrestling matches until the deck groaned. Hypoth found a corner to juggle knives, turning every gathering into his stage. MDB patrolled with silent steps, politely declining mugs of ale pressed into his hand. And Noodle, sheriff's hat tipped low, boots stretched long on a bench, spent his time watching. Every port, every crewman, every motion of the tide. Always on guard, rattles faint under his breath. Valbella, of course, had no need for games to draw eyes. She moved through the crowd with her thorn crown glinting, corset laced to temptation, shorts riding higher than propriety allowed. When the sailors whistled, she didn't sneer this time. She leaned close, whispered wickedness that left even the boldest red-faced, then turned away with a laugh. Sometimes she lingered at the rail, hair damp from spray, hips swaying with the ship's roll, knowing full well every gaze followed. It was a time of calm. Until the storm. The clouds had rolled in with a speed unnatural. The first drops fell like knives, cold and sharp, then the world became thunder. Days blurred together. The great cruise ship groaned with every wave, sails snapped and bent, and below decks the air grew damp with fear and sweat. Families huddled, children cried, crewmen tied knots until their hands bled. The Amen squad stayed close, but not idle. MDB braced the ship's beams, sparking as he forced bent iron back into place. Auric carried barrels to reinforce the bulkhead, swearing the whole time but never dropping one. Noodle walked the flooded halls, tail rattling softly, calming folk with blunt words. "Storm pass, stay, no fear." His presence was a law stronger than any rope. Valbella made herself useful in stranger ways. A touch of hex here, a ward there, soothing fevers with stolen herbs, then leaning too close to those she healed, a soft laugh, a whisper in their ear, the brush of her chest against their arm. In a world drowning, she made them forget. Raunch came as easily to her as breath. Hypoth he entertained. Even soaked, even tired, he spun stories of winter palaces and noble scandals, mimicked the captain until the children laughed, juggled spoons and cups until the room cheered. He made mockery of the storm, daring it to steal his audience. When at last the thunder ceased, the ship drifted like a wounded beast. The sun cracked the clouds, a weak glow, and through the dripping windows came shapes in the water. Dolphins, but not ordinary. They leapt in arcs, dolphin jam, their sleek bodies shining, but their eyes human, playful, and sharp. They waved with webbed hands, sang songs that rippled through the storm-quiet air. Families crowded the rails, marveling. Children clapped, sailors cheered. The Amen squad reacted each in their way. Oryx scowled at them, muttering, "Fish not friend," though one child caught him smiling faintly when a dolphin splashed Noodle's hat. Noodle, tail rattling, touched his brim in respect. Sheriff or not, nature's oddities deserved their due. Hypoth bowed to them like royalty, flourishing his saber. "My audience grows ever stranger," he quipped, earning laughter from the crowd. Valbella leaned over the rail, letting the sea spray wet her corset, breasts pressed against the wood as she waved. The dolphins whistled louder, and she laughed low, raunch in every sound. "Even the sea wants a taste," she teased to no one in particular. MDB simply tilted his head, sensors clicking. Catalogued, aquatic jam, classification incomplete, potentially delightful. Then the cheering stopped. The ship lurched. From the deck came shouts. The guards' vessels ahead had slowed. One was caught, tangled in something vast. The Amen squad pushed forward to the rail. There upon the sea floated a bloom so massive it turned the water black and red. A body of tendrils, translucent and shimmering, like living glass. Lightning crawled inside its form as though it had swallowed the storm itself. A man-o'-war. Threstle. Her tendrils stretched for leagues, poolsing with venom, tangling the smaller guard ship like a toy. The men aboard screamed, hacked at the living cords, but each cut only birthed more. The bloom rolled, and her body, jelly woman, hips wide as a barge, bosom swelling like waves, loomed over the wreckage. The cruise ship's crew froze. One path lay ahead: steer into the bloom, risk everything. The other: veer away, abandon the guard ship, let Threstle feed. Passengers sobbed. The captain shouted orders. The Amen squad stood at the rail, spray soaking them, faces set. Noodle's eyes narrowed beneath his hat. Valbella's smirk faltered into something sharp. Oryx tightened his grip on his halberd, knuckles white. Hypoth flourished his blade, eyes lit with something between thrill and fear. MDB word, processing outcomes, gears ticking like a heartbeat. The sea itself held its breath. And then, the crew begged, the passengers screamed, and the captain froze at the wheel. The guard ship thrashed in Thressel's tendrils, men hacking, cursing, praying. Noodle broke the silence. His hat brim dripped seawater, eyes narrowed. "This ain't our fight, we steer off, now." The weight of his voice carried like a law. Even Oryx, halberd raised, growled but lowered his weapon. MDB did not counter. His logic concluded the same. Hypoth clicked his tongue, disappointed at losing the stage. Valbella tilted her head, yellow eyes glinting with something unreadable, but she did not argue. The order was given. The cruise ship veered, sails straining, cutting away from the bloom. Behind them, the guard ship screamed. And then she appeared. Atop the writhing tendrils of Threstle, a figure stood, Myrine. Draped in silks that clung wet to her curves, hair streaming in the sea wind, her laughter carried like bells warped by salt. With a gesture of her hand, the water rose. The struggling men were dragged down, limbs flailing, bubbles bursting. One reached skyward, begging for air. Myrine leaned down and kissed his palm before he vanished beneath the waves. The guard ship cracked, swallowed. Threstle pulsed, tendrils quivering as though savoring the meal. Myrine leaned against her massive form, stroking translucent flesh with a lover's touch. Her eyes, half-lidded, hungry, followed the retreating cruise ship, and she smiled. Passengers aboard wept, some cursing the Amen squad for cowardice, others thanking them for survival. Noodle kept his jaw clenched tight, silent under their words. Oryx brooded, muttering about snake-bloom cowards. Hypoth simply smirked, spinning his saber. "We live to perform another day." Valbella, she glanced back once, yellow eyes locked on Myrine's silhouette. Her thorn crown glinted, and she whispered to herself, "Another witch in the sea, another hunger like mine." MDB did not turn. His optics glowed steady. Course correction successful. Probability of survival, 74%. His voice carried no victory, only calculation. The sea swallowed the bloom behind them. and the ship pressed on, sails filled with desperate wind. The storm was already fading into memory when the ship found new horror. Out of the water came shadows, fins, claws, and wet bodies slick with salt. A hunting party of aquatic jam. They swarmed like trained predators, vaulting onto the deck with tridents and spears. Each one knew their role, their numbers, and their kill quotas. Screams filled the night. Passengers clutched children, sailors fought with hooks and knives. The Amen squad rose in the chaos. Oryx's halberd swept wide, knocking 2 raiders into the sea with bone-cracking force. Noodle pressed into the heart of the fight, stoic eyes, his rattled tail shaking just enough to cow those who dared close in. Valbella cursed from the rear, her thorn crown glowing faintly as a hex coiled around a spear-wielding hunter, dropping him into the surf screaming. Hypoth ducked and wove like a jester on stage, his cutlass a blur, laughing as he carved into one who dared mock him. MDB stood like a wall, glaive raised high, his left arm spitting sparks as surgical blades carved back any who tried to reach the civilians. His right arm's launcher barked in steady rhythm, punching holes through carapace and scale. It was brutal, it was long, and it was costly. By dawn, another guard ship was gone. Only 2 remained to escort the cruise ship through hostile seas. The dead were gathered. Sailors and Amen alike laid out the fallen jam, blessing them with salt and water rites. The civilians, there were too many. The crew promised they'd be buried with dignity when the ship reached land. A week passed, the sea calmed. The mood returned to chatter, to routine. For a moment, life felt normal again. And then, the unexpected. As the ship coasted in calmer waters, a figure leapt aboard in a spray of foam. An aquatic jam in maid's attire, smiling warmly despite the shock of her sudden arrival. She carried bundles of paper, handing them out like a vendor on market day. Welcome, welcome. Vioil Reef Festival guides, tourist maps, lodging recommendations, everything you need, she chimed, bowing neatly. Passengers blinked in disbelief before swarming her for pamphlets. Children laughed, tugging at her sleeves. Even hardened sailors softened, clapping her shoulder as though she were a welcome friend. The Amen reacted in their own ways. Oryx scowled, gripping his halberd, muttering that no one should trust a fish with manners. Valbella raised an amused brow, lips curling into a smirk. Cute, desperate little thing trying to earn coin, wonder what else she'd sell. Hypoth actually clapped, calling out, "Now this is theater. Leaping on stage, all smiles, no fear, I like her." MDB tilted his head, silent, his inner sensors flickering faintly at something only he could sense. Noodle stayed calm, watching, respectful of the display but wary of the timing. The maid bowed again, oblivious to the Amen's private calculations, before drifting into the crowd of civilians. By the time the squad regrouped, the ship was docking. Sailors threw ropes, gulls circled overhead, and the faint hum of a coastal port rolled over the waves. The 5 retreated below deck to debate their next move. Noodle laid out his wish first. "My town's not far, I need to see it." His words were steady, but something in his eyes betrayed the longing of a man torn between past and present. Others spoke up with different thoughts. Valbella's eyes lingered on the coast, that thorn crown dimly glowing. She wanted something, but her smile gave no hint of whether it was knowledge, power, or bodies to toy with. Hypoth was already fantasizing about courts, stages, and noble intrigue. He clearly wanted to walk among people who recognized his talent. Oryx grumbled for blood, for a test of strength, his voice echoing like the growl of an empty stomach. MDB, however, spoke with chilling clarity. "Signal detected. Strong. This is not coincidence." His voice crackled, his chest unit pulsing faintly as though the land itself called him. The arguments rose, the voices clashed. And then the decision. The choice that would set their next path. They would follow MDB's signal. Noodle nodded, not because it was his preference, but because as leader he felt it. This was not chance, it was destiny. His rattled tail swayed once, decisively, as the others fell into uneasy agreement. They emerged back onto the deck as the ship's bell tolled for docking. Passengers cheered, sailors shouted orders, and the coastal city loomed before them. The Amen squad stepped into the sunlit chaos of the docks, united, though each carried doubts in their hearts. And deep within MDB's chassis, the signal pulsed, insistent, like the heartbeat of a forgotten past. Ahead, Alifkong's burning sands. The ship's bell faded behind them as the Amen squad set foot on the docks of Cordon. Unlike Gorlog's endless wastes, this land thrummed with color and clamor. Market banners flapped in the wind, voices called out in dozens of tongues, and everywhere a Betronians. Fox-eared traders hawked spices, scaled lizard folk hauled crates, and broad-shouldered wolf guards watched the crowd with sharp eyes. Furred, feathered, scaled, and finned, the city was alive with beast folk, and their presence was so natural here that humans seemed the oddity. Noodle froze mid-step. His rattler tail quivered once as his eyes scanned faces so familiar yet so distant. The scent of sand, spice, and musk carried him back to deserts he thought he'd left behind. Oryx stood taller, puffing his chest out. "See, Orc land, my land, smell that, Orc musk." And a Betronian boar merchant squinted at him, then barked a laugh. "Orc, you're no orc, Snake Eyes, scales don't lie." Oryx bristled, teeth bared. "Orc, orc, not snake, orc fight, orc bleed." He thumped his halberd against the cobblestones, the sound echoing like thunder. The merchant only chuckled and walked on, muttering something about confused half-breeds. Valbella leaned lazily against a stall, watching the exchange with a curl of her lips. But her amusement soured as a group of young serpent girls slithered by, their scales gleaming in the sun. They eyed Noodle openly, giggling, flicking forked tongues, whispering things far from subtle. One even traced a finger down her scaled midriff and purred. "Strong tail, good mate." Noodle froze, color draining from his human cheeks. He stammered something inaudible, clutching his chest like he'd rather fight a dozen raiders than answer. Valbella's yellow eyes narrowed, not because the girls were bold, she respected boldness, but because their gaze wasn't hers for once. She crossed her arms under her chest, thorn crown dimly aglow, and muttered, "Little snakes think they're clever." A flick of her magic made one of the girls' baskets spill, sending dates tumbling into the dirt. She didn't smirk, but the timing was perfect. Hypoth, of course, laughed outright, clapping like he'd seen a comedy. "By the gods, Val, your timing. I'd pay to see more of that." He twirled his cutlass in a flourish, enjoying the scene far too much. Through it all, MDB did not stop moving. The bot's heavy steps carried him past merchants, past gawking civilians, his sensors locked onto the signal only he could hear. Sparks trailed faintly from his chassis, his frame hulking as though the crowd parted instinctively for him. "Wait, MDB," Noodle called, but he turned back at another scent, eyes watering. A familiar spice seller waved to him, calling him son of the desert. His heart clenched. Oryx too lingered, snarling at another Betronian who dared mutter, "Snake." And so the squad split without meaning to. MDB pressed forward, single-minded. Noodle and Oryx stalled in the crowd, tugged between memory and pride. That left two. Valbella glanced between them, arms crossed, thorn crown glowing faintly with her rising temper. Hypoth adjusted his mask, sighing, his sharp eyes narrowing with the precision of a man who read plays better than faces. He chuckled darkly. "Two snakes chasing ghosts, one bot chasing static. Quite the choice, isn't it?" Valbella tilted her head, lips curling into a wicked smirk. "Not really. Ghosts don't interest me. Power does." "Then MDB," Hypoth said, tapping his temple. "You feel it too." And so they chose. They followed MDB. The crowd swallowed Noodle and Oryx protests, their voices lost to the noise of the market. The bot marched ahead, and behind him came Valbella and Hypoth, their footsteps sharp against the stone. For the first time since they'd set sail, the Amen squad was no longer together. The split. The Amen squad had splintered. The crowd in the heat swallowed Noodle and Oryx, leaving MDB alone on his path, and trailing behind him, Valbella and Hypoth. The sun burned mercilessly over the Cordon Plains. Each step cracked dust underfoot, the horizon a wavering mirage. MDB moved like a machine should, steady, inexorable, unfazed by the heat. His armor hissed with the faint whir of cooling vents, the faint ping of metal resonating like a hammer striking an anvil. Behind him, though, flesh faltered. Valbella fanned herself with a strip of cloth, her corset loosened, thorn crown glimmering faintly with each bead of sweat that trickled down her temple. She muttered curses under her breath, at the hag that cursed her, at the heat, at the damn bot who never once slowed down. Hypoth fared worse. His ice-born body wilted in the sun, his fair skin flushed red, his fine garments soaked through. Each step dragged like chains. He still tried to jest, his voice cracked but smug. Hell itself envies this heat. But by noon he could bear no more. His knees buckled. He tore at his finery with trembling hands, shedding his coat, his layers, his jester's mask. For the first time, Hypoth looked like a man, not a performer, vulnerable, shaking, his breath shallow. Valbella stumbled forward, panic edging her voice. MDB, he's dying. The bot stopped. He turned, golden optics dimming as they scanned Hypoth's faltering form. For the first time all day, MDB chose not to follow the signal. He crouched, scooped Hypoth up in arms of iron, and resumed walking. Valbella blinked, chest tight. She muttered to herself, "Even a machine knows mercy." Then she pulled her corset tighter, barring more skin for air, and trudged on beside them. Nightfall saved them. The heat bled away, replaced with a cool wind that whipped through the scrublands. Valbella breathed deeper, her pale green skin cooling at last, her bosom rising and falling with exhaustion. Hypoth lay unconscious in MDB's arms, pale but alive, the bot's cooling systems humming as he vented chilled air across the elf's skin. Then came the town. At first glance it looked dead, one dusty street, shuttered windows, a silence that bit harder than the desert. Valbella staggered forward, shouting, "Help! Someone, please!" She was ready to give anything, everything, if it meant saving Hypoth. The doors creaked. A figure emerged. A tall Jayum, part stag with antlers that caught the moonlight, wearing a frayed cowboy hat and a tarnished badge. His eyes were hard but not cruel. He studied them in silence, the sheriff's emblem catching faint silver glow. "Sheriff's gone," he said at last. His voice was gravel, slow and deliberate. "But I was taught to weigh every soul who comes beggin'." He looked them over, his gaze lingering on Valbella, who had already begun unfastening her corset, ready to barter flesh for kindness. "Stop," his voice cracked like a whip. "I don't want that, not tonight." Valbella froze, lips curling, equal parts embarrassed and irritated. But the man went on, "The last sheriff taught me. Every plea's a story, some lies, some truths. Yours stinks of truth, so I'll take you in." They followed him inside a one-room shack. He rolled in a barrel of water by himself, strong arms, though his frame didn't boast of it. He gave no food, only said, "I'll tell you the tale in the morn. For now, drink, rest." His eyes flickered once more to MDB, narrowing as though he saw an omen in that dented faceplate and burning optics. Without another word, he stepped out, the door closing heavy behind him. MDB set Hypoth gently on a cot. A soft whir followed as the bot opened a vent and engaged an internal fan, channeling cool air over the elf's face. Hypoth's color returned, faint but steady. Valbella collapsed into a chair. Only then did she realize she was stripped down to her undergarments, her stockings and corset draped across the floor. A flush touched her cheeks, not from modesty, but annoyance at herself for showing weakness. Muttering, she pulled her clothes back on piece by piece. MDB stood watch. He neither sat nor slept. His optics stayed fixed on the window, his processors filled with the relentless signal pulsing in his skull. A whisper only he could hear. "Come find me, deeper, closer." The bot never moved. All night he listened. And the Amen squad's splintered tale deepened into silence. End of MDB's misadventures, Part I. Morning broke over the dust-smeared windows. The door creaked open without warning. No knock, just the silhouette of antlers filling the frame. Inside, the three survivors stirred in their own ways. Valbella sprawled across the cot, hair a wild halo, her corset half loosened as she breathed slow and heavy, recovering from the scouring heat of yesterday. MDB sat slumped, optics dimmed, his frame humming irregularly as he rationed what little power he had left. Hypoth, however, blinked groggily from MDB's arms, only to see the figure in the doorway. His blood froze. The Stagjam's outline triggered something deep within him, a fracture in his carefully gestured mask. Fear struck so hard that Hypoth thrashed, tumbling clumsily out of MDB's arms. He hit the floor with a crack, breath sharp, bare chest heaving. Stay back," he croaked, eyes wide as a child. And then came the memory. Snowflakes drifted across his youth. He had been a boy then, an eager student with clumsy hands and two bright eyes. Hypoth had rushed to the local green, proud to share what tricks he had learned, a tumble, a flourish, a jest meant to delight. But the crowd that gathered wasn't there to laugh with him. Reindeer jams, tall and sneering, encircled him. They mocked every move, their jeers cutting sharper than knives. Laughter rose when one grabbed his mask and tore it away. Another struck him across the jaw. They beat him until he bled, stripping his clothes and leaving him half naked in the snow. "Elf trash," they spat. "You'll never be a performer, you're nothing." He lay there, bruised and humiliated, staring at the sky, his dream collapsing in the cold. The memory slammed shut. In the present, Hypoth's trembling hand stretched forward. "No more," he whispered, voice breaking. "No more." Valbella shot upright, messy-haired, bleary-eyed, blinking between him and the figure in the doorway. The man stood there holding a tray of food, roasted meat, bread, something warm. His expression was unreadable. Hypoth, however, had already lost control, shuddering so hard he soiled himself. Then his body went slack, fainting in a pool of shame and sweat. The antlered man set the food down gently. His voice was calm, steady. "I'll be back then." Without another glance, he closed the door. MDB stirred, drained and clicking before standing and trudging outside. He tilted his head skyward, spreading his panels to soak in the light. Energy hummed faintly back through his body as his systems rebooted in trickles. Inside, Valbella sat at the small table, ate half the meal, and left the rest untouched for Hypoth. She refused to touch him, too disgusted by the stench. Hours passed. By the time Hypoth stirred again, his pants had dried stiff, the room rank with ammonia. Groaning, he sat up, face flushed red. With a snap of his fingers, he summoned frost, using ice magic to cleanse himself in a blast of cold. Valbella watched from her chair, chin in hand, yellow eyes gleaming in amusement. "Well," she said at last, lips curving into a wicked smirk, "nice balls, bro." Hypoth went rigid. His face paled, then burned scarlet. He grabbed for the plate she slid across the table, muttering curses as he wolfed down the food. Valbella laughed softly, stretching like a cat, content to let his shame simmer. By noon, they both looked more themselves. Valbella groomed, corset tight and hair neat, Hypoth back in his layers, mask at least somewhat cleaned of frost. MDB returned, optics bright again, his frame buzzing with restored strength. A knock rattled the door. This time, Valbella and Hypoth traded glances. When the door opened, Hypoth snarked first. "Ever hear of knocking before you walk into someone's quarters?" The antlered man chuckled, deep and quiet. "Sometimes when you don't open a door," he said, "what's waiting on the other side is already a corpse." Hypoth froze, his smirk faltered. That old fear coiled back in his gut. The man stepped fully inside now, setting his hat aside. His face was weathered, strong-jawed but solemn. "Name, Carvin," he said at last, "and I reckon you deserve a story." He leaned against the table, eyes distant. "Long ago this town was dying, bandits bled us dry, every coin, every crumb taken. None of us dared fight back. Then one day a stranger came crawling out of the desert, a snake man. Skin cracked, scales shining. We wanted nothing to do with him. Yuanti are cultists, killers, but he stayed. Hunted scraps, kept to himself. When bandits came again, we paid. He did not. He struck. Cut them down in the street, clean and brutal, then ate his fill right there. We watched. And we wondered, he wasn't kin, wasn't friend, wasn't foe. What was he? Carvin's voice softened. In time, he stayed. We spoke with him, learned him, found a protector under that serpent's skin. Stoic, stern, honest in ways we couldn't name. We called him Sheriff, not because he wanted it, not because we needed a badge, but because we believed. He paused, eyes lowering. One day he left, no word, no reason, just gone, maybe a coward, maybe not, but we still call him Sheriff. We still remember him fondly. His name, Carvin looked up now, eyes glinting, was Noodle, because of that snake neck. Silence fell heavy in the room. Valbella and Hypoth both turned to each other at once. Their unspoken look was enough. Carvin read it in their faces. So, he muttered, voice rough, that bastard lives. MDB shifted, hydraulics hissing as he started to rise, but Carvin pressed him back down with one strong hand. I'm not done. Sit. For the first time, MDB obeyed not out of programming, but because something in Carvin's tone carried weight. Valbella noticed. So did Hypoth. The bot's optics dimmed slightly. Is this feeling? Carvin continued, softer now. Noodle left like he came, silent. Maybe we were the cowards for not asking him to stay. He taught me everything I know. Every scar I carry I owe to his lessons. If he's alive, if he's back. Carvin clasped his hands together, shoulders heavy. I'd like to see him one more time. He turned away, left them with the food, and stepped into the sunlight. Inside, the three huddled together. Valbella whispered first, half teasing but earnest. So our snake is a sheriff, explains his stiff posture. She bit her lip, eyes hazy in daydream before shaking herself. Hypoth groaned, exasperated, muttering for her to shut up. MDB said nothing, but his optics glowed faint. By the time they looked up, Carvin was gone. Back to his duty, his watch over the little town. The three of them sat in silence, then laughter, then soft banter as they caught Hypoth up on what he had missed. A strange bond had formed, forged not in comfort, but in desperation, secrets, and stories of the past. End of part 2. Auric awoke with a groan, the kind that rumbled low from his chest. The room stank of sweat, smoke, and spirits. Snake Jayam women and a Betronian maidens lay scattered in the sheets, groaning in pain and pleasure from the night before, like battlefield survivors after war. Food, wine, and torn clothing littered the floor. Auric scratched himself absently, then tugged on his armor piece by piece, brain foggy but satisfied. He thought of nothing and everything all at once, mostly food, maybe Noodle, where Noodle. Pushing the door open, he left the women behind without a second glance. The streets of Cordran bustled with life, a Betronians haggling, merchants hawking spices so strong Auric sneezed fire, travelers weaving through the scents and shouts. He bought food but masked its stench under heaps of pepper and spice. It burned his tongue, made his eyes water, but it was food. Hours slipped by. Sunset smeared gold across the city. The spice lost its bite, and with it, Auric's mood soured. He sat heavily on a bench, hands clasping his warhammer halberd, brain spinning in rare clarity. They leave me? His chest tightened. Anger churned. He rose suddenly, slamming the halberd's shaft into the dirt, cracking the cobbles beneath. But he stopped. Across the park, he saw him. Noodle sat alone, a stick of roasted meat in his hand, chewing quietly. The snake man paused mid-bite, watching Auric's outburst, then took another mouthful as if nothing had happened. Auric didn't think. He charged forward, scooped Noodle into a crushing hug, nearly lifting him off the ground. Noodle stiffened, eyes wide, dropping his food. For a heartbeat, his mind flashed to the serpent cult, to betrayal, to fear. Then, with a shove, he freed himself, dusting his scales, trying to breathe. Auric grinned like a fool, oblivious to the tension. He sat, slapping the bench beside him. Noodle crouched, picked the fallen stick up, blew off the dirt, and ate again. Then, quietly, he broke the silence. You want some? They sat together, chewing. The park around them hummed with laughter, music, and the mingled scents of ale and spice. Families strolled, Betronians of all shapes and sizes wandering the paths. For once, it was peace. Noodle stared upward, his voice softer than Auric had ever heard it. Do you think? He paused, chewed, swallowed. Do you think we belong here, buddy? His serpent eyes flicked sideways, catching Auric with that hypnotic sway, almost entrancing. Auric didn't look. He tore into the meat with his teeth, grinning wide. Friend good food. Noodle blinked. Then he chuckled softly, gaze returning to the stars. You know, I've got demons too, Auric. I'm not sure if you understand me like I understand you, but... His eyes glistened faintly, lost in the vast night. I don't know if I belong. Auric cut him off with a guttural snort. He clapped his hands together, rubbed them, then spread them wide. Life is fight. You know fight why you life. If me no fight, me no strong, no friends here. He jabbed the ground with a thick finger, shaking his head, tuskless jaw firm. No talk good. Listen, Auric wise. Noodle turned slowly, staring at him with those deep serpent eyes. For a long moment, silence lingered. Then, finally, Noodle sighed, leaning back. Yeah, I guess I'll keep fighting the good fight, buddy. Auric nudged him with an elbow, gesturing for more food. Noodle smirked, handing it over. They sat shoulder to shoulder, snake and not snake, lost in the night's calm. The world went on around them, tourists laughing, Abatronians weaving through the lantern-lit park, the smell of roasted spices in the air. For once, Noodle let himself breathe, let himself enjoy. Not everything had to be life or death. Maybe there could be moments like this. His thoughts strayed to the others, Valbella, MDB, Hypoth, and where they might be now. Hey, he said suddenly, his voice steadier, though softer, I'm a little homesick. Do you mind coming with me? I'm not sure where the rest of the gang is, but it's just me and you, buddy. Auric froze mid-bite, chewed, then swallowed. Tribe never not far away, we find. He slapped his halberd against his shoulder, motioning for them to move. Hold on, bud. We're gonna need a few things first. The two shopped through the markets, gathering supplies and a pair of horses. When the time came to ride, Auric stared at his mount, tilted his head, then snorted. With a booming laugh, he sprinted beside Noodle's horse, his massive frame thundering across the dirt road. Passers-by stared, mouths agape, as the strange duo barreled past. A rattlesnake paladin sheriff and an orc who was not, riding into the night. The sun dipped below the horizon. The stars bled across the sky, and together they vanished into the dark. End of Part 1, Auric's Clash. The room was quiet, save for the low hum of MDB's core. Valbella leaned back on her cot, one leg crossed over the other, smirk tugging at her lips. Oh, you had a troubled past too, huh? Hypoth chuckled, tossing his hair back with theatrical flair. Don't we all? Then his sharp eyes flicked toward MDB, still motionless in the corner. Well, maybe some more than others. Our dear medic here lost his dame mind. He expected a laugh. Valbella snorted into her hand. For a brief moment, the two of them giggled like schoolyard brats, trading amusement at MDB's expense. But MDB didn't reply. His metal fingers twitched. His frame shuddered. The hum of his core pitched low, sputtered, then rasped as if trying to hold back something deeper. The laughter died. Both Valbella and Hypoth froze as the great machine raised his hands, not in defense, not to brandish his glaive, but slowly, deliberately to his face. He traced his fingers down the steel ridges, across lenses that glowed faintly, a motion unmistakable, wiping away tears that weren't there. Valbella's smile crumbled. Hypoth's throat tightened. And then MDB spoke, his voice calm, mechanical, yet weighted with something more. If I die, companions, please run away. Valbella blinked, stunned. Hypoth opened his mouth, closed it again. MDB's head turned toward them. The glow of his optics flared, steady. If my body is crushed, I will have exactly 752.76432.467 seconds of fleeting memories before shutdown. That is all. I do not wish to see you perish for a medical drone like me. The words hung in the air, iron heavy. Valbella looked away sharply, covering her mouth, a sting in her chest she couldn't name. Hypoth swore under his breath, storming forward, jabbing two fingers into MDB's chest plate again and again. You don't get to say that, you rusting bastard. You don't get to write yourself off. His voice cracked, raw, even as his words carried venom. MDB didn't flinch. He simply stared back. Silence stretched, fragile and heavy. Finally, Valbella exhaled, a shaky laugh breaking the moment. Never leave anyone to die, huh? Not even a lump of bolts. Hypoth clicked his tongue, turning away. Yeah, that's the rule. They folded into uneasy rest that night. MDB stood sentinel at the window, optics dimmed but never fully gone. Hypoth curled against the wall, muttering in his sleep. Valbella lay awake far longer than she wanted, watching MDB's outline against the moonlight. And for the first time, she thought he almost looked human. Day broke in warm gold rays. The three emerged, weariness stitched into their steps. Hypoth, ever prideful, sought distraction in the bustle of the town square. Bright colors, jugglers, children laughing. He clapped mockingly, jeered with wit, but it was clear he was trying to laugh away something hollow inside. Valbella went her own way, listening for rumors in whispers of taverns and markets. She heard Noodle's name once or twice, locals recalling a serpent sheriff who vanished seasons ago. Her lips curled faintly, mind turning, weighing the story. MDB remained outside, panels spread wide to catch the sun, silent as stone. But inside, static churned. The signal tugged at his core like a hook buried deep. His frame spasmed once violently before settling. He said nothing. In the window above, Carvin, the antlered sheriff who had given them shelter, leaned on the sill. His gaze was sharp, watchful, almost protective. He stared at the machine standing so still, and at the two odd companions wandering the town. Something was stirring. But for now, the trio had found a fragile understanding. They would never abandon one another, not even in the darkest hour. End of Part 3. The desert night groaned with the hiss of shifting sands as Auric and Noodle trudged through the dunes. Auric, grin wide and tuskless mouth open in joy, carried his horse over one shoulder like a sack of grain, legs pounding the earth as if it weighed nothing. Noodle rode in silence, reins loose in his hands, his snake eyes flicking back now and again to check on his strange, stubborn companion. The peace shattered. A plume of sand erupted, hiss, crack, whistle. Dozens of figures slithered out, torches and crossbows raised. Snakeabatronians, their scales glinting in the moonlight, encircled the pair. Auric only smiled broader, setting the horse down gently before hefting his halberd. Noodle's jaw tightened, calming his mount with one hand. No one moved. A standoff. The hiss of snakes carried over the wind. Then Auric bellowed, "ORICK, fight now," and charged headlong into the mass. Noodle cursed, twisting in the saddle, but the quarrel came too quick. A crossbow bolt whistled and buried into his side. His body jerked, scales flashing, but he stayed upright. Snakes surged in, ceremonial daggers drawn, circling him with ritualistic chants. Auric laughed as he smashed one, then two, foes into pulp, halberd swinging with brutal delight. Blood sprayed, limbs broke, he was in his element, roaring with every strike. But it was a distraction. The true pack pressed down on Noodle. He fought spear glowing faintly as he invoked his oath, but they came in waves, blades cutting his flesh, chanting louder. Blood streaked his scales, crimson soaking into the sand. A dagger thrust pierced his side, another cut across his arm. They forced him down. His horse collapsed on top of him, pinning his lower body. Noodle gasped, the weight crushing. "Snake who betrayed the brood," one hissed. "The one who cared, tonight you blade." Across the dune, Auric turned. His smile faltered. He saw Noodle bound beneath writhing bodies, his brother-in-arms cut open. He started forward. And froze. The voices, dark, cold, familiar, they coiled in his skull, hissing in harmony. "You are strong, Auric. You are chosen. No orc, no tribe, only us. Embrace the serpent, embrace your truth." He sank to his knees, halberd slipping from his hands into the sand. His vision blurred as a figure slithered up behind him. A scaled hand, dagger glinting, lifted his chin. A palm cut open, blood dripping. A single drop fell into his mouth. The world shifted. His flesh rippled. Scales erupted across his face. His hands trembled, then steadied, not his own will. His body rose, halberd retrieved, movements mechanical, like a puppet strung by invisible cords. Inside his head, Oryx screamed. He clawed at the bars of his own mind, begging, roaring, but the serpent. Voices drowned him. Kill the heretic, kill the weakness, be reborn, Orslish the Grand. Pinned under the horse, Noodle looked up through bloodied eyes. His voice was faint, broken, but it reached across the sand. Oryx. Oryx's head jerked. Tears welled. He fought harder, but his body marched forward. S-O-O-R-R-R-R-R-Y-Y-Y-Y. He roared, voice cracking, echoing across the dunes. His body raised the halberd high, hammer end gleaming in the moonlight. Noodle lowered his head, blood dripping, eyes shut in grim acceptance. Oryx is Orc, he whispered. The hammer fell. End of Oryx's clash. Broken resolve. The sun still beat heavy over Cordron when Valbella, Hypoth, and MDB gathered in the saloon, shaded from the heat. They slumped into seats at the bar, ordering drinks and a platter of bread and meats. Their bodies rested, but their words carried weight. Another day in the wastes, another story about our favorite noodle neck, Valbella smirked, leaning back in her chair, legs crossed. Her crown of thorns caught the light, casting sharp shadows across her pale green skin. You ever notice how every tale makes him sound bigger than he is? I swear he's 2 feet taller every time. Hypoth swirled his cup lazily, his mask hiding the smirk beneath. Don't we all? I mean, hell, even I've been made into some bloody ice phantom in the gossip rags. Can't wait till they write about me juggling knives while seducing half the town. He tipped his glass mockingly toward Valbella. She scoffed and fired back. Careful, elf, I'd pay to see that show. MDB sat stiffly at the table, servos humming as he replayed and sorted through recordings of past encounters. His voice cut flat across their banter. Correction. Sheriff Noodle has survived 12 separate solo encounters in the wastes without recorded backup. My files indicate high probability of embellishment by locals, but the baseline of his feats is accurate. Valbella raised an eyebrow at Hypoth. See, even the Tin Man believes in him. They shared a laugh, something like schoolyard friends teasing each other, though beneath it all was a thin unease. Then it happened. A sharp whistle outside. The laughter stopped. The saloon grew still. Patrons pressed against windows, peering through cracks in doors. All stared in one direction, west toward the burning horizon. What's this about? Hypoth asked, setting his cup down. Festival. The sheriff stood near the door, one hand resting on his gun. His face was tight, jaw locked. Not a festival. Nobody walks out there at this hour. Sun cooks flesh straight to bone, unless they're mad. The 3 exchanged glances. Curiosity gnawed at them. Come on, Valbella muttered, standing. Better than sitting here. They pushed through the doors into the blaze of the afternoon sun. Heat struck them like a hammer. In the distance, shimmering in the haze, a figure lumbered closer. At first, it looked like a mirage. Then clearer. It was carrying a horse, and something draped over its shoulder. MDB's optics whirred, adjusting focus. Visual confirmation, the body is Noodle's proportions. The carrier is, his voice cut flat, Oryx. Valbella's heart skipped. What? Hypoth stepped into the shade of a nearby awning, mask tilting. Oh no. The figure staggered closer, sun bleeding around him. When he finally came within sight, his face told the story before his voice did. Defeat, regret, sorrow carved into every line. Oryx collapsed to his knees, sand kicking up around him, the horse and the limp body falling heavily at his side. Help, he roared, voice breaking. His massive chest heaved. Tears streaked his scaled cheeks. Oryxsorrry. His words cracked into sobs, choking on guilt. Valbella sprinted forward, hand over her mouth as tears welled up. MDB marched stiffly, scanning the body even as his systems tried to keep composure. Hypoth lingered, eyes burning beneath his mask, but fear, or maybe shame, kept him from stepping closer. The body was lowered to the ground, blood-soaked, lifeless, torn by blades. Oryx sobbed uncontrollably, curling into himself, his halberd discarded in the sand. Sorry, friend, Oryck kill, Oryck kill. He slammed his fists into the dirt. Valbella knelt, shaking her head, tears streaming freely now. MDB said nothing. He only stood, recording every detail, servos trembling. The corpse was carried inside, laid in silence. A burial was prepared, hearts sunk and morale shattered. Auric huddled in a corner of the saloon, rocking, weeping like a child who had lost everything. Hypoth, trembling with his own grief, lashed out. "This is on you," he shouted, pointing his saber at Auric. His voice cracked with venom and tears. "You let him die, all that muscle, all that rage, and you weren't strong enough to stop it." His hands shook. He turned away, mask hiding the tears streaming underneath. MDB lingered over the body, sensors scanning every inch. Valbella sat in a rocking chair, crown tilted low, staring at nothing, broken-hearted. Days passed. A memorial was raised in the town square. The sheriff, Carvin, took the stage, voice breaking as he spoke. "It is with heavy heart," he began, tears dripping into his beard, "that I announce our protector is dead. Noodle was my mentor, my role model, and do I dare say it, my friend?" His voice grew louder, carrying to the whole town. "I swear to you, Noodle will gut every last snake in the wastes." The crowd cried out, voices trembling, fists raised. Valbella wept openly now, no pretense left. Auric danced clumsily, performing a traditional orc mourning rite, tears mixing with sweat. Hypoth walked away, fists clenched, muttering, "3 months and I got too attached. Pathetic." Then MDB moved. His heavy frame clanked onto the stage, pushing Carvin aside. His voice boomed. "Attention. For 2 days I have analyzed samples from the corpse, cross-checked with Sheriff Noodle's prior records. Conclusion, this body is not Noodle." The crowd erupted into boos. Carvin grabbed MDB by the chest plate. "You dare tarnish this memorial." But MDB projected the data. Holograms flashed, scale samples, blood types, genetic patterns. "Observe. Here Noodle's known samples. Here the corpse. They do not match. This is not him." Valbella and Hypoth froze. The implication struck. MDB had samples of them all, without their knowing. MDB pressed on, unfazed. "Multiple blood traces were found. Noodle's is present but secondary. This corpse belonged to another. Noodle is alive." The crowd jeered louder, some ready to throw stones. But Valbella and Hypoth looked at each other, realization dawning. Carvin leaned close to MDB, voice a low growl. "Bring me proof, or I'll dismantle you myself." Tension ripped through the square. Valbella whispered fiercely to Hypoth, "We can't let this sit, if Noodle's alive." Hypoth shook his head. "Auric's broken, the town wants closure, and MDB's about to get scrapped." But MDB's voice cut through again, unwavering. "I propose a search party." The silence hung heavy. The crowd did not move. But in the corner, Valbella stood, wiping her tears, eyes alight with grim determination. "Then I'm going. Proof or no proof, I'll find him." Hypoth groaned, throwing his hands up. "God's damn it, fine. If he's out there, I'm not letting him think I stayed behind." MDB turned his head slowly to Auric. The broken warrior sat slumped, rocking, muttering apologies under his breath. And then, like a spark catching tinder, Auric's head snapped up. "Noodle alive!" His fists clenched. His voice cracked, still wet with tears. "ORICK find! ORICK bring back friend!" The crowd gasped as Auric grabbed his halberd, slamming its butt into the dirt, eyes blazing with renewed fire. Carvin stared, torn between disbelief and hope. The Amen squad was broken, bruised, but not done. Search. The morning after the memorial broke into chaos, the Amen squad gathered on the outskirts of Cordron. Carvin watched from the walls, arms folded, his antlers catching the first rays of dawn. He said nothing, only stared at them, the silent weight of hope and doubt heavy in his gaze. Valbella adjusted the straps of her corset, eyes glinting with determination despite the ache in her chest. "If he's alive, we'll drag his scaly ass back ourselves." Hypoth spun his saber once, the blade catching the morning light. His voice was casual, but his mask tilted away so they wouldn't see the nervous twitch in his mouth. "And if he's not, Well, at least MDB gets to say, I told you so. Oryx slammed the butt of his halberd into the sand, voice booming with a broken man's fury. Noodle alive. ORICK bring back. Friend not dead. ORICK not fail again. His words made nearby guards shift uncomfortably, but no one dared stop him. MDB stepped forward last, glowing optics scanning the wastes. His voice was even, clipped, but beneath it lay a faint hum, a glitching tremor almost like grief. Signal pattern from the body site continues northwest. Estimated probability of Noodle's survival, 22.5%. The squad rode hard into the wastes. Oryx's horse nearly collapsed under his weight, so he walked instead, halberd slung across his back. Hours stretched. The sun beat down mercilessly. Heat shimmered off dunes like liquid fire. By midday, Valbella's hair clung damp to her face. She hissed curses under her breath and pulled her thorn crown tighter, using its pain to keep focused. Hypoth fared worse. The ice elf stripped down to little more than shirt and pants, muttering about being cooked alive. Oryx trudged on in silence, jaw tight, every step a vow. MDB, tireless, led them across the burning sand, following the faint trail. Broken footprints, faint streaks of blood, the occasional scale half buried in grit. And then they saw it. From the top of a dune, sprawled below, the remnants of a massacre. Snake Abatronians lay in heaps, their ceremonial daggers scattered. Some bore wounds from a halberd strike, others had been crushed under impossible force. The air still stank of blood and bile. The squad dismounted cautiously. Valbella knelt, running her fingers through the sand. He was here, recently. MDB clicked, lowering his sensors to a collapsed corpse. Confirmed, blood traces, Noodle's significant loss, but his optics narrowed, glowing brighter. Patterns of survival detected. They spread out, combing the site. That's when they found the first clue. A trail of blood leading into the dunes. A shredded snake banner, torn into strips. And, half buried in the sand, the bloated carcass of a horse, its belly slit open. Valbella covered her mouth. Oh gods. Oryx froze, tears welling in his serpent eyes. Friend alive. Hypoth squatted low, examining the corpse with a grimace. If he was desperate enough to cut open a horse and crawl inside, he might have lived the sun. He stood, brushing sand from his hands. Might have. MDB word, sensors pinging faintly. Signal continues. North Ridge. 74% likelihood subject survived. The squad pressed forward, hearts pounding, until they crested another dune. And there. A figure sprawled in the sand, scales blistered, skin cracked from the sun. His rattled tail twitched weakly, swishing grit. His eyes, half shut, caught the light. Noodle. He lay frying beneath the brutal sun, lips cracked, chest barely moving. Around him, the last of the snake raiders' corpses lay torn apart, suggesting he'd fought until he couldn't anymore. For a breathless moment, no one moved. Then Oryx broke, charging forward with a roar, scooping Noodle's limp body into his arms, sobbing. Friend! ORICK save. Valbella's chest clenched, her usual sharp tongue gone as she knelt beside them. Gods, you stubborn bastard. Hypoth hung back, folding his arms, voice quieter than usual. I'll be damned. MDB stepped forward, systems buzzing as his tools unfolded. Administering emergency treatment. Hydration priority. Begin stabilization. His flat voice cut through their emotions, but it carried a tremor only they noticed. Noodle stirred faintly, lips parting. His voice was ragged, a whisper on the wind. Oryx is Orc. And then he fell unconscious again. The Amen squad froze. Tears, silence, and the weight of everything unsaid hung heavy. But one thing was certain now. Noodle was alive. Recovery. The oasis town had not expected such a sight. A hulking orcish figure staggering in with a bloodied serpent man slung over his arms, a thorn-crowned witch and masked elf at his side, and behind them a sparking, weapon-clad machine that carried the air of doom. People scattered at first, muttering of raiders, cultists, or worse. But when MDB's medical tools flared and Valbella barked orders like a seasoned survivor, The innkeeper's doors were thrown open, and they were given a room. The sun was falling, shadows stretching over the palm groves. Inside, Noodle lay stretched on a cot, his rattling breaths harsh, his scales cracked and peeling like sunburnt leather. MDB hovered at his side, his left arm splitting open into fine surgical appendages that worked tirelessly. Hydration drips, stitching, salves of cooling alchemical gels mixed from what Valbella handed him. His optics flickered as he spoke in monotone. Probability of survival increased. 48%, 64%, stabilizing. Valbella hovered nearby, biting her lip. She had stripped down her thorn crown and corset to fetch water, sweat streaking her freckled skin, but her yellow eyes never left Noodle. She muttered, half to herself, "You stubborn, snake-necked idiot, making me cry in front of all these people." Auric knelt in the corner, fists pressed against his skull. His halberd lay discarded. His face was blotched with tear stains and painted in ash from the dance of mourning he'd done earlier. He looked broken, muttering prayers in broken Orcish. "Auric no let friend die, Auric not fail, Auric no snake." Hypoth, of course, sat with legs crossed on a stool, mask tilted. His saber leaned against the wall and he spun a coin between his fingers, voice sharp even in the heavy air. "Well, that's one way to survive the sun. Gut a horse and crawl inside. The man has flair for the dramatic." But his tone softened as his mask tilted toward Noodle. "Don't you dare make me care this much again." Valbella's head snapped toward him, glare sharp. "You cared, did you?" Hypoth froze, coin stilling, then scoffed. "Of course not. I just don't like replacing party members. Costs too much in drinks." She smirked, leaning close, whispering in his ear. "Your mask hides your eyes, but not your blush, darling." Hypoth stiffened, gripping his coin tighter. Auric finally raised his head, voice booming raw with emotion. "Noodle strong. Noodle come back. ORICK happy. ORICK dance again." He half rose, nearly starting into another Orcish funeral dance before Valbella snapped. "Sit your ass down before I hex your feet to the floor." He did. Silence fell again, broken only by Noodle's rattling breaths. Then MDB's optics glowed brighter. Stabilization complete, subject no longer critical, rebooting consciousness. Noodle stirred, eyes flickering open. His pupils' serpentine slits darted around the room before settling on Auric. He managed a dry hiss, lips cracked. "Auric is Orc." Tears burst fresh down Auric's face as he clutched Noodle's hand with both massive paws. "Friend." Valbella wiped her cheek roughly, pretending it was sweat. Hypoth coughed, muttering, "Well, that's settled." The room was heavy with relief, exhaustion, and something unspoken, like the Amen squad had just stepped through a trial no enemy could match. Later that night, when the town brought food and ale, the group ate together. Valbella, loosened by drink, leaned against Hypoth's shoulder, whispering something lewd that made him nearly drop his cup. Auric laughed for the first time in days, his booming voice startling nearby townsfolk. MDB sat silently at the edge, optics dim, but his hand occasionally twitched like he wanted to join their laughter. They had survived the ambush. They had saved Noodle. And though scars remained, for a moment, they were whole again.